What's up, y'all? In this video, we're going to be going over externalities. Externalities are important because A, it's in the curriculum, and B, out of this unit, it's the one thing that I've seen the most tested on throughout the entirety of Unit 6. So make sure you guys pay attention to this video. And so before we start, another joke. I watched hockey before it was cool. They're basically swimming. So externalities. And so before we get into negative and positive externalities and what that looks like on a graph, we first have to go over, well, what exactly are externalities here? So an externality is just a third person side effect. Right? So let me repeat that. An externality is just a third person side effect. And that can be both a negative and or a positive side effect here. And so why are they considered market failures? Why are they in Unit 6? Well, here we are going to say that the free market fails to include external costs or external benefits. When a private citizen or a private corporation / business produces, they don't take into account the social costs or the social benefits of their actions. All they take into account is sort of how much it costs them and how much it benefits them individually. And so whenever the free market fails to take into account how their actions can cost or benefit others, it is going to cause inefficiency. Because if there were no government involvement, there would be too much of some goods and too little of others. In other words, right? In the free market, when individuals and companies do not take into account third-party effects, right? Yet again, both positive or negative, right? It can cause overproduction of some goods and underproduction of others. And so let's get into the bulk of today's video, which is negative and positive externalities and how it exactly looks like on the graph here. And so we're first going to start off with negative externalities. And so a negative externality is a situation that results in a cost for a different person other than the original decision maker. In other words, if citizen A or company A takes an action, they do not take into account how their action is going to negatively impact other people or society at large. And so what we're going to say is that these costs, in quotes, spill over, right, to other people or society. And so our example is with the chemical company. If a chemical company is polluting the air when it produces a good, they're taking into account how it affects their company, the cost of polluting and how the cost of polluting affects their own company individually. What they fail to take into account is how their pollution affects society, how it affects other companies, how it affects other people. And so since we're going to say polluting or pollution is a bad thing, we're going to categorize that as a negative externality. Well, how does it look like on a graph here? Well, here, right, we're first going to start off with our axes, just price and quantity. We're going to start off with our downward sloping demand curve, which remember is also our marginal social benefit. Remember, marginal social benefit is just how much benefit society receives from the consumption of that good. And because of diminishing returns, our marginal social benefit, much like our demand curve, is downward sloping. The more you consume of something, the less satisfaction, the less benefit you're going to receive. Upward sloping wise, right, we have our supply curve, which is our marginal private costs. So notice we haven't hit our marginal social cost yet. We're talking about the private cost here. And let's say, right, for sake of things here, we are talking about cigarettes, right? Because we're going to say cigarettes are bad and cigarettes cause a negative externality or negative consequence for other people. And so when people smoke cigarettes, which yet again is a bad thing, they don't take into account the social cost of smoking. Right? They don't really take into account the third person negative side effects of them smoking are. Instead, what they take into account is just their private cost of smoking here. And so that's why we have our upward sloping marginal private cost. And so where these two curves intersect, really this equilibrium point, is going to be the quantity of the free market and also the price of the free market. In other words, at this particular point where our marginal private cost intersects with our marginal social benefit is the amount that companies are going to produce, the quantity of the free market here. Well, here we know that smoking cigarettes is bad. And so what happens to our marginal private cost curve, or where is our marginal social cost curve, if we take into account how bad smoking is, right? Because obviously as society, we want less cigarettes to be produced than at this free market quantity equilibrium point. And so if we take into account the marginal social cost, we take into account these external costs, right? Our marginal social cost curve is to the left of our marginal private cost curve. It's important to note here, the curve did not shift, right? We just have at our marginal private cost curve is right here. Our marginal social cost curve is right here. So the curves didn't shift at all. It's just these two curves simultaneously exist at these two spots here. And so at this equilibrium where marginal social cost equals marginal social benefit, right? This is our socially optimal equilibrium and our socially optimal price. Ignore, that's a P. So here, right? Where marginal social cost is marginal social benefit gets us to our socially optimal equilibrium. This is the point or the quantity that society once produced. And so the reason why our marginal social cost curve will be to the left of our marginal private cost curve is because society just wants less cigarettes, right? They say at this free market equilibrium, too much is being produced because of the high external cost of smoking. And so when we take into account those external costs, right, our marginal social cost curve is to the left of our marginal private cost curves, which then we're at the quantity of the social or the socially optimal quantity here. But why is this a market failure here, right? So why is this a market failure? Well, here, at this point right here, let's do this in purple to make it easier. So at this point right here, at the free market quantity equilibrium, marginal private cost equals marginal social benefit, right? We know that too much is being produced. And we know that because at this free market equilibrium, right, up here, our marginal social cost is greater than our marginal social benefit at the quantity of the free market. And we know this because this right here represents our marginal social benefit at this free market quantity. And this up here represents our marginal social cost at that free market equilibrium. And so we know, right, that society wants the quantity of cigarettes to be here, where our marginal social costs intersects with their marginal social benefit, right? At this socially optimal quantity down here. And so what this means is that this green triangle right here represents the area of dead weight loss. And the reason why that's dead weight loss is because at this free market quantity, too much is being produced, right? Our marginal social cost is greater than our marginal social benefit. We know that society wants this quantity, the social optimal quantity, so they know they want to produce where MSB equals MP or MSC. And so that's why this green triangle right here is our area of dead weight loss. Well, here, right? Let's clean this up a little bit, right? So here, right? Yet again, our price, our quantity, our supply, which is our marginal private cost, and then our downward sloping marginal demand, which is our marginal social benefit, where it intersects our quantity of our free market, and this is our price of our free market. So we know, right, that society wants to be producing here at this marginal social cost point, right, at this socially optimal quantity and the socially optimal price. Well, how does the government do that, right? How do they correct this negative externality? How do they go from here, right, at this marginal private cost curve and get that over there to the marginal social cost? Well, what should they do? Well, what they should do, right, or the solution to it is a per unit tax. In other words, the government should set up an excise tax to tax the amount of the externality here. And so once that happens, if the government institutes a per unit tax our marginal private cost curve is going to shift to the left, right? Meaning, right? Oops. Bring that back. Meaning, right, that this right here, right, no longer exists, right? That this marginal private cost curve sort of goes away, and in its place, there is our marginal social cost, which equals our marginal private cost here. And then at that point, right, we are producing at this socially optimal quantity and the socially optimal price. So notice, a lump sum tax does not do the same thing as a per unit tax. So for our marginal private cost curve to shift to the left to become our marginal social cost curve, the government needs to institute a per unit tax. They need to tax every cigarette that is being produced. And that is how a government corrects a negative externality. Well, the flip side, a positive externality. Well, a positive externality is the opposite of a negative externality. It is a benefit for a different person other than the original decision maker. And in quotes, the benefits spill over to other people or society. Example, if a parent decides to take their child to get a flu shot, the parent doesn't care, right, how that flu shot is going to impact society or benefit society. Instead, the parent takes their kid to get a flu shot because the parent wants their kid to be protected from the flu. They don't care about how the flu shot is going to cause an overall benefit to society here. So here, right, what we are going to do, right, or how it looks like is, it looks the same, but we're going to call them slightly different. So here we have our supply, which is our marginal social cost. Right? And here, this is what's different. Our demand is our marginal private benefit. Right? So remember, we're talking about the marginal private benefit because the parents are taking their kids to get a flu shot. They're not looking at the social benefits of getting the flu shot, but instead they're looking at the private benefits, how it's impacting and benefiting their child specifically. And so here, where these two curves intersect is our quantity of the free market and then our price of the free market. And so what is our marginal social benefit curve going to look like when we take into account the external benefits of getting everyone a flu shot? And let's say that this is our graph for flu shots, right? So if we take into account the benefits, the external benefits of getting a flu shot, what we are going to see is that our marginal social benefit curve is to the right of our marginal private benefit curve. Why? Well, the reason for that is because at the quantity of the free market, right, this right here, we're going to say flu shots are underproduced. They are underproduced because here, where MSB equals MSC, right, remember that's the allocatively or the most socially optimal point, right? That is the amount of flu shots that society wants. And so here, we are underproducing here. And so our marginal social benefit is to the right of our marginal private benefit because society wants more flu shots because society recognizes the benefits of everyone getting vaccinated for the flu. And so just like it, right, there is dead weight loss also. At this quantity of the free market, this is our marginal private benefit. However, right, this is our marginal social benefit. And so at this point, right, our marginal social cost is less than our marginal private benefit. Marginal social benefit. And because of that, right, society is underproducing. Society wants to be producing where MSC equals MSB. And so because of that, right, this green triangle right here represents the area of dead weight loss. Well, what can society do to fix this positive externality here? Well, they are going to give a per unit subsidy. So notice it's not a lump sum subsidy, but a per unit subsidy. And when they do that, right, our marginal private cost curve is going to shift to the right and it becomes our marginal social benefit curve. Just like a negative externality here. All right, so that leads us to our practice AP questions. I know there's multiple choice, but I just want to go over the free response question here. So let's assume that the market for good X is perfectly competitive and the production of good X creates a negative externality here. A negative externality. So draw a correctly labeled graph and label the following. The marginal private cost, the marginal social cost, MPC, MSC. The market, okay, so let's do that first, right? So here, remember you have to label your axes, price, quantity. It wants us to label, right, our marginal social cost and our marginal private cost. Well, here, right, we know that this is our marginal social benefit, which is our demand curve. We know that this right here is our marginal private cost. And then to the left of it is going to be our marginal social cost. All right. The market so what else? That's one. So number two, the market quantity labeled QM. Right? So the market quantity is where MPC meets MSB, and that will be our quantity of the market. The allocative efficient quantity labeled QS. So allocative efficiency, right, is just the socially optimal point. In other words, where marginal social benefit equals our marginal social cost, which we know, right, is right here. And so this is going to be QS, our allocative efficient quantity. And then lastly, the area of deadweight loss shaded completely. Well, remember, right, with a negative externality, this right here represents our marginal social benefit at this quantity of the free market. Well, at this quantity, right, our social cost is up here. So we are going to say, right, that our marginal social cost is greater than our marginal social benefit. So they are producing way too much. And because of that, right, this right here, this triangle, shaded completely, represents the area of deadweight loss. All right, so part B. So part B is assume that a lump sum tax, right? Lump sum tax is imposed. What happens to the deadweight loss? Well, the easy answer here is nothing. Nothing happens, right? Why? Right? Because it asks us to explain, we have to add the word because. Because a lump sum tax does not change our marginal cost. Right? And so remember, marginal social cost and marginal private cost, they're just all forms of marginal cost here. And so the only thing that's going to change our marginal cost is going to be a per unit tax or a per unit subsidy. So a lump sum tax and a lump sum subsidy is not going to get rid of the deadweight loss. It's not going to shift our marginal private cost to our marginal social cost. And neither is it going to change for a positive externality, our marginal private benefit to the right to the marginal social benefit there. And so the reason why nothing happens to deadweight loss again is because of the lump sum tax. If it was a per unit tax, then the area of deadweight loss would go away because then society would be producing at the allocative efficient mark where marginal social benefit equals our marginal social cost. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.